Welcome, everyone. My name is Dante Miller. I'm the president and co-founder of Village Microfund, a social impact fund that teaches, invests, and supports Black entrepreneurs. But we also create alternative investment models, and we do that using new technology, like blockchain technology, for example, as well as just writing new contracts. And the way that I got into this work was we started this about 11 years ago at Morehouse College while we were interning on Wall Street at a company called Goldman Sachs. And what we learned there is that ultimately the financial system actually works really well, but it just works for the people that it was designed for. And so we wanted to figure out what would a system that was designed for us actually look like. And when I kind of discovered blockchain technology, my mind blew. It really blew my mind because this is the first time in the history of money that things like this have been possible, and that's something that really pulled me into the space. And so one of the things that we created, these alternative investment models, is called NDAO, which is a platform that allows communities to create DAOs, which are digital cooperatives, which are basically, it allows communities to be able to collectively own, govern, and manage funds, and to be able to do this as easy as it would be to create a Facebook page. And so to my right is Justin Jones. I'll allow him to introduce himself, but he is the one that is bringing the DAO into fruition.
Hi, how's everybody doing? My name's Justin Jones, co-founder of Endow, CEO. The platform itself is something that we've been thinking about for a while, and we realized that the crypto space is very jargon heavy and it's very confusing to a lot of people, but we know that DAOs or digital cooperatives are something that people talk about but don't necessarily know exists in a way, that they can spin them up as easily as he said, making a Facebook group. So we're excited to bring this product to you all, and let's get into the conversation.
Yeah. And so I feel that oftentimes when people are talking about cryptocurrency, like the barrier of understanding is the fact that people don't exactly understand the problems that it solves. And it just starts with like, I don't know how many of you ever heard of the term techno feudalism, but it's essentially the idea that, let's say the internet is a city and every, building in the city is, a website. When you open up an account on, let's say, Twitter, you don't actually own, not only do you not own your account, but you don't own anything that you produce in the account. And so with the internet, there were literally three stages. The first stage was basically digital billboards. Like you could actually, you could just read it. That's pretty much the extent of it. The second stage was when you could write. You could actually produce content, and things like social media started to pop up. But there's still the problem of you don't actually own that content. It's like you can create the content, but ultimately Twitter is the one that's going to get the ads from that. And so the third level is Web3 or blockchain technology. And the whole idea is that now with the content that you create online, it now has a digital asset associated with it that you can own yourself. And that is kind of like the origin of why the blockchain exists in the first place. And so I'll pass it to, what was
I think you described it pretty well. I don't have anything to add. I think we can get into some of the questions. We have an interviewer here. They're choosing to remain off camera, but that's fine. I think that they are in the space trying to learn about, what this new technology is. They're hearing about it. They're not necessarily understanding exactly what it is, but they know that it's important. And so they have some questions that I think a lot of the viewers of this content will probably have similar questions. And so we'll try our best to answer them as simply as possible. Let's get into the questions.
Okay, awesome. So I'm coming from the viewpoint of a person over 50 with financial background, an entrepreneur, and I'm hearing about crypto. I'm hearing more and more that the economy is about to shift, right? And so on my end, I'm feeling like, okay, maybe I missed the mark, right? And now I want to jump in. So I want you all to come to me in that aspect of, first of all, what is blockchain? You talked about it a little bit, but just like a fundamental understanding of how our economy is shifting and how blockchain will benefit that or be that, and then how I can get into the game. Not catch up to where everybody else is at, but at least get into the game to at least benefit.
All right. So, blockchain at the end of the day, it solves the problem of creating things online. And so, for example, like let's take real mail versus email. When you send me a letter, you no longer have that letter, but that doesn't work like that on the internet. When you send me an email, we both have that copy of that email. And so everything on the internet is a copy. And so what happens with the reason why that's a problem when it comes to things and of course money is that if you produce a copy of money that's counterfeit, right? So what blockchain allows you to do is to make sure that the money actually goes from one place to another. And the reason that that's important is because it's like, have you ever wondered what like a PayPal does? Like, what is the job of a PayPal? What is the job of a Visa, a MasterCard? Like, they take half of every transaction and they charge 3% on every transaction. And it's like the reason that they're able to do that is because it's their job to make sure that money goes from one place to another. And then you combine that with the fact that you said you're an accountant. And so obviously, like you're familiar with double entry accounting, that every time a transaction happens, you have the transaction from the perspective of the seller, the transaction from the perspective of the buyer. And both of those entries are recorded, but what blockchain also created was something called triple entry accounting. It is anytime a transaction happens, not only is it my side and your side recorded, but there's a third entry that literally anyone in the world can see. And so that is the information that builds up a blockchain. Every 10 minutes, a new block of data is created, and every time someone transacts, that transaction is posted in the blockchain. And so that's high level of what it is. But why it's important is because, again, it's like you have these giant companies like PayPal that the reason that you can't get your money immediately through a bank is because ultimately, like that 3 to 5 days, that's what it takes to clear and settle those transactions. Now you have that completely automated by code, instant.
Which is why you see a lot of institutions moving into this space because they realize it's cheaper to use blockchain than to have it settled, off chain, as they call it, through various institutions. And a little bit about, to add on to what Dante said about blockchain, it's computers talking to each other. And the way you pass that double spin problem is that each computer has to line up with what the next computer says. And so blockchain is essentially a network of computers that are all talking to each other, and they're each checking each other's math, if you will. And so if one part of the block in the blockchain is off, meaning someone manipulated some data or something, that entry won't move forward within the block because the other computers will say, hey, that's wrong. This is, something's an error here, right? And so then you can notice that there was manipulation or whatever. And like he said, with the triple entry, that public ledger, so blockchain is public, anyone can see transactions on the blockchain, right? And so that's something that we haven't had before, which really redefines what we talk about when we talk about trust in terms of contracts, in terms of things like that, which we can get into a little later. But that is why blockchain is so revolutionary. But it's not new. It's actually pretty old. It's been around for a while. But I think with the creation of cryptocurrencies, blockchain basically found a new use case that made it even more prevalent.
Okay. So from what you said, I felt like more efficiency, felt like quicker turnaround, right? So those are the benefits. Okay. Okay, cool.
It also opens up opportunities for things like smart contracts. Like, have you ever heard of that before?
Yeah.
So essentially, because money can be stored online and because you can essentially create these contracts out of code, like let's say me and you bet on a sports game. When we make that bet, however much money we bet on that is stored inside of the smart contract as the currency. So then whenever that game happens, like let's say you win that bet, as soon as it recognizes that you win that bet, it automatically sends it to you without anybody having to be in between that process. And so on a small scale, it's like, okay, that's pretty simple. But on a large scale, you can create entire financial institutions because at the end of the day, those are also just contracts. Like insurance is also just contracts. And so people are building these decentralized apps that are just simply like a combination of smart contracts. It's like, if this happens, then this happens. If this happens, then this happens. And as a result, you can now have these organizations like DAOs, these digital cooperatives that can essentially function without having to have like a CEO or a president. It can literally just be a group of people that have a shared mission that can work together in order to achieve something. And all that is essentially governed by code.
Okay. You use the word decentralized. Talk a little bit about, I want to word this correctly. We hear a lot about the government getting involved now, right? What is the difference between centralized and decentralized? And is there a better option?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily a better or worse option. It's a matter of preference.
Risk tolerance, really.
Yes, risk tolerance.
Risk tolerance.
Yeah, because when you talk about centralized, so like Coinbase is a centralized institution. Coinbase is one of those institutions that, when people are just trying to get into crypto, I recommend that you start with Coinbase because it is the easiest to use. And because they do have that institutional backing that in case something goes wrong, they can fix it. Right? So that is the benefit of having a centralized institution is like you have a group of people that are working towards this specific thing and you trust that group of people. However, there are some people that have more of a tolerance for risks and there are some people that just want to have more control over their life.
They don't trust the institution.
They don't trust
That's
the institution.
exactly right.
Exactly.
Okay.
And
With
so,
good reason, right? It's not bad faith. It's
Right.
constant, getting
History.
played over history. So now you have options to do things in a decentralized way, right? But as we said, you're taking on that risk. You're taking on all of those, things that can go wrong, and no one's there to save you except yourself. But I think,
but also no one's there to stop you.
yeah, no one's there to stop you.
Do you find a better return with the higher risk? Like the normal market?
Yeah, I mean,
Depending, right?
Depending.
Because as we, we'll get into some of the issues with crypto, right? Because I think that's how most people come to it. It's right when you decentralize, yeah, you're taking on that risk, and so there are bad actors, but there are also, gold mines. There are opportunities, right? Everyone loves the number go up, right? If I buy this thing, it's going to go up something 1,000%, right? You don't see that in traditional financial markets, even if the underlying asset is considered, not real, fake, whatever. It's still appreciating in this new system. And so people have made, money. There are 12-year-old millionaires out here now, right? That an institution would have stopped them immediately and said, 1, you're too young. 2, you don't have the money. 3, what are you doing here? But they have an internet connection, a phone, and you have these decentralized applications, right? And these exchanges. So you can go on there and do whatever you want, right? For good or bad, right? Better or worse. You can make money, you can lose money. But again, the history of the institutional centralizing of, very important things like finances, leaves room for why you would want something to be decentralized. And I think it's, again, preference, right? Some people don't want to take on that risk, which, makes sense. I would rather you steward this thing, my money, because I believe in you. You've maybe gone to school, you've had experience, handling assets, right? You understand something that I might not. And so I trust you. Also, there's FDIC insurance, right? If I lose a certain amount of money, you'll give me this amount back.
Exactly.
That doesn't necessarily exist in crypto. I think there are some places where people are trying to figure out where that works. But again, you're taking on that risk.
Yeah, and it's like, for example, like I'm an investor. I was playing with Robinhood during like the whole GameStop debacle. And so I lost approximately $100,000 when they turned off the exchanges. And that's not something that could happen on like a decentralized exchange. It happened because these centralized players, they saw that there was a risk and that they couldn't afford that risk. And so they decided to cut the machine off until, they got to the other side of that. And yeah, it's like when you get burned by a centralized institution like that, it is very easy to lean into the decentralized part. But then, all the responsibility lies with you. So.
All right, so let's back up a little bit. Kind of got ahead of myself in terms of basic knowledge, right? What gives the crypto value? Like, you understand what I'm saying? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so initially, it's a few things. So, like, the conversation of value in itself is complicated. And so it's not just like a simple answer, but like with Bitcoin specifically, initially the value was that people were willing to exchange their electricity in order to power these machines in order to keep Bitcoin running. And so it's like, it's a mixture of one, the energy itself, two, the the fact that people are willing to trade their time and resources in order to exchange for this thing. And it's like, for the same reason that gold is valuable, everything also applies to Bitcoin outside of the industrial use. And to be honest, gold doesn't have a lot of industrial use. And so when you talk about the fact that it's an entity that can't be manipulated by a government, that is a big piece of it. When you talk about the fact that it is deflationary, and so as there are only like a certain amount of Bitcoin that will ever exist, you know that, unlike the US dollar that's losing several percentage points every year, that this is going to be something that maintains its value, at least in that way. And I mean, yeah, it's just belief. It's like we aren't old enough to know that when the dollar was first created, they literally had to force people to use it through the military, and then they banned gold. And so it's like no one just uses these things because
They voluntarily
they
chose
voluntarily chose it. It's just like that was the system that we grew up in, so that's what we use. But now this is literally a better technology that has all the same uses of these old technologies that we previously used for money, that isn't beholden to the institutions.
Yeah, and a lot of crypto, for people who want to get into the history of it, was started by cryptographers, people who are trying to, one, solve problems about how do you hide, complex information. And then second, cypherpunk people who believe that, institutions are all bad. We need to get away from these institutions. They control us, right? We need to create our own money, safe money, sound money. They call it sound money because, again, it can't be manipulated by printing excess, right? And so what you have is what's there, and so you can denominate that down into they call it satoshis, which are sats, but that's the derivation of Bitcoin. And so value is just a philosophical question, and people always talk about, well, what is money? Well, money is just a belief that this thing that I'm exchanging is worth whatever it's being exchanged for, and because we both agree on that belief, you're willing to take X amount of dollars for whatever service, whatever product, right? But that can change, right, depending on context, right? They talk about prison economies, right? 4 cigarettes might be worth something,
Right.
in there, right? The money doesn't matter necessarily, right? So what is the context in which we're using crypto? And so the value is that you can create a community, with your own currency. Now, do you have people willing to exchange within that currency? If so, then essentially you have money now, right? And that can work within that small group. So I think the value is in where you find yourself in understanding the money, one, like how money works and what money should be able to do, what it shouldn't be able to do, right? So you have to ask yourself those questions. And then also what you understand about technology, right? At the end of the day, I always look at this and say most people care about it because it's money, right? Or there's money involved. But it's also fundamentally a technology. It allows us to self-organize in a way that you couldn't before using money, right? You'd have to go through institutions, right? You'd have to go through brokers and things like that. But now it's peer-to-peer. Right? If we choose to engage in an economy that's just us with no centralized institution to arbitrate for us, we can do that. That didn't necessarily exist before. And it exists at scale now. So you could do that in a local community maybe. Right? You can create a currency and everyone in that community exchanges it, right? In a traditional system. But now globally, right, where I can't meet face-to-face because we don't live together, we can now exchange value across the internet, right, and coordinate across the internet because now value is now decentralized in a sense. And so I think that that's really one of the more important things about it, is that you have to understand what you know and don't know about what kind of makes all this come together, and that's going to determine what your value is in it. Because a lot of people only see the value because, again, number go up.
Right.
I should put money in this, number go up, I have more money than I did before. Right? And
Right.
that's fine. But when you get more into the layers of it, there's an entire world that's now being opened up because we've changed how value can be propagated in the world.
I love that. especially when you're starting to get the mindset of Black economics in totality, like the necessary need of it right now, more so than ever. This type of platform, get educated on it. You know what I mean? We can definitely use it for that. So I love that. Okay. And so just thinking in basic again, I'm keeping y'all low level. Buy buy crypto for, let's keep it at $1. I buy my crypto. I leave it there. It's just like the stock market where it grows. And what makes it grow? Is it just like the stock market, or is it something different?
It has things in common, and it also is different in a lot of ways. What the stock market has as an advantage is the fact that there is a governing body that makes them report every quarter, every year, so that even though yes, it goes up and down based on speculation, it always comes back down to like what is the future worth of this? Like when we look at the financial statements today, and so crypto does not necessarily have that. But what crypto does have is the blockchain that you can see every transaction that's happening in real time. And so you can kind of make some of those similar, like, you can make the comparisons to the information of, like, okay, I can read the blockchain and get this type of information versus I can read, the quarterly reports and get this type of information. How it's different is I'd say trying to
Because the difference is interesting.
Yeah.
I'll say that one of the big differences is, again, we kind of talked about when we talk about that underlying asset, like actually not being worth anything, right?
Yeah.
So when you talk about a stock or a company, right? Again, there are quarterly earnings, there's revenue, there's profit, right? There actually exists. You talk about Doge, right? Well, what is Doge, right?
Yeah.
It's a cryptocurrency. Is there an underlying inherent value outside of the fact that, again, right, I'm willing to trade it for something? No, it doesn't. It's not used. I think Mark Cuban tried to give it a use. He's like, you can buy Mavericks tickets and stuff, right? And so yeah, you can use it now. It becomes more open because someone has agreed to exchange it again for value in such a way. But if I just believe in Doge and you believe in Doge and you believe in Doge and we just keep putting money in there, it will rise,
Okay.
right? But again, if I get scared off of Doge, if I don't agree with the person who made it or whoever's promoting it at the time, like Elon, right? I don't want to have it anymore. I can sell it. Well, we're all affected now because you start selling that off, the price is going to go down. But there is no fundamental, tangible asset that is considered valuable in a material sense.
Yeah, and that's like a meme coin. Now that's an extreme perspective.
Oh, Doge.
Yeah, because it's like Doge. I do like meme coins. I'm not gonna lie, but I do look at that in a sense like lottery tickets that don't expire. But then on the other hand, you actually have utility tokens, and I don't feel like they get enough recognition and exposure in terms of like what they can provide because, like for example, when we were talking about those decentralized organizations, like there is a coin called Helium, where essentially it is like decentralized Wi-Fi. And so they have hardware. That's essentially the thing that will provide the power to keep the chain running. And what this hardware produces is a signal. And if you have enough people in this area that have this signal, then now you have free Wi-Fi. And so these are like you're essentially investing in a piece of a company, but instead of having a stock, now you have a coin. And it's like there's a lot of different use cases like that. Like Ethereum, which was the coin that came after Bitcoin, was also the one that invented smart contracts, NFTs, and a lot of those other innovations. Ethereum, you can really think about that like a decentralized app store, or even a decentralized Amazon Web Services.
Okay.
It's like, are you familiar? Well, it's like a few days ago, maybe like a week ago, Amazon Web Services, one of their, I forgot the specific situation, but they had an issue,
Yeah, I did hear about
and
that.
like half of the internet shut down. Right, so that is the problem of a centralized institution in the sense that like you can literally have one issue that knocks out half the internet. Whereas for blockchain, there are so many different data storage, like web hosting, all the jobs that Amazon Web Services do, like they're also available in crypto just as a group of people working for this brand
And
and
it's those
building this hardware.
computers
Yeah.
specifically, right? So Amazon went down because something within their server blew out, which caused a cascading effect of other services that depended on that one
Right.
service.
Okay.
Whereas with blockchain, every computer essentially is the service. So as long as there's one computer up running that chain, it works. So
Okay.
there wouldn't have necessarily been an issue like Amazon Web Services because that compute would have been dispersed across all the different computers that are making up this blockchain or phones or whatever, right? But with Amazon, because it's everything's on their servers, one issue in their servers, and anything that's connected to that will cascade down. So I think that's also another big value is that you're dispersing the ability for a system to maintain itself across multiple nodes, as they call them, or blocks, versus it being stored in one centralized software or service that's providing it. So most of the internet is Amazon Web Services. If Amazon Web Services messes up, the internet's going down.
So that's my question. Next question is, does this take away the opportunity for monopolies in that? Am I thinking correctly when you talk about?
I won't say it takes away the opportunity
Yeah.
per se. I think it provides a shield for you to fight against monopolies.
Okay.
Right, you can fight against them because a monopoly, in my opinion, just a very simple basis of it is that you're able to capture enough of the value chain that essentially either they have to join you because they can't beat you because you capture
Correct.
so much of this value chain from the raw materials or whatever down to the production of it. Whereas essentially you can work against a monopoly in a crypto or blockchain kind of situation because you can bring multiple people together to then hopefully capture smaller points in the value chain, but then bring them together. And so then you can compete in a sense, right? And that kind of leads me, I guess, to think about DAOs, which are, again, it's just a group with a shared bank account, right?
Right.
But what does it mean for a group to have a shared bank account, across the globe? How do you coordinate yourself? What can you coordinate yourself to do? There are people in the crypto space who believe that you can create nations, right, using blockchain, because all it is just coordination, contracts, and trust. That's the fundamental of how you build a society.
Yeah,
You have some
resources.
type of record keeping. You have a medium of exchange. That's your money, and then you trust and coordinate with others of like-minded value. And so, what could that mean? How do you take supply chains, connect them to maybe entrepreneurs who don't have access to them, but because we're all in this network, you get maybe a better deal, or maybe you get first access, right? And so what does it mean for us to coordinate? You talked about, black economics and all that. I love that fact that when you really talk about, I guess everyone loves Black Wall Street, right? There are multiple Black Wall Streets,
Exactly.
but the one we all know is in Tulsa. And I think the interesting thing about that is that one of the founders of quote unquote Black Wall Street is O.T. Gurley. He was a billionaire. He's a person who owned most of the land. He worked with others and provided them, the land at a discounted rate so that they could start their own businesses and start building. We can do that today, right?
You don't need a benevolent billionaire.
And you don't need the benevolent billionaire, right? We can collectively pool our money and then go buy assets and then determine how that asset should be used. Should we sell it? Should we build it? Right? And you can start to piece together societies in a digital context where, again, we don't have to be face to face. We don't have to exist here, right? But we can still coordinate across, the globe just using this platform, etc.
It's also like you mentioned, well, one of us mentioned insurance earlier. And it's like, how many times have you had insurance for something, but then you finally need to come collect on your claim? And it's like a whole workforce of people whose job
Yes,
is
sir.
to make sure that you don't. But it's like, what if that was just a smart contract? Or it's just like, okay, these are the conditions that you actually need in order to, cash out on this fund. And, once those conditions are hit, they pay you out.
Asia.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Okay. Okay. I had a question after that. Okay. So I have my $1,000, right? I'm jumping in the game, bought my Coinbase or whatever. What's attracting me to buy a particular, I don't even know what to call it, coin?
So I personally like to invest in utility, like things that I believe in that people actually use. And so I believe that crypto grows for the same reason that most internet companies grow, and that's network. When people use it a lot, it grows in value. And so, like, obviously, like Bitcoin has kind of taken that spot as like a digital gold. And so that is the safest cryptocurrency. That was the first one. That is the gold standard. After that, Ethereum is probably the one with the most builders. It's the second largest coin. It is the one, like I said, that invented smart contracts, that invented DAOs, that invented NFTs, and a lot of those things. But then there are things that came after them, like the Ethereum competitors, like Solana. Solana does a lot of the same things that Ethereum does, but just because it came later when the technology was better, it was cheaper and faster. And they also have different niches that they're trying to pursue. Like Justin just talked about their partnership with Western Union. They also are, I believe, trying to ink a deal with Wall Street to actually get stocks onboarded onto the blockchain so that you could actively trade stocks on the blockchain. And so every chain, every coin kind of has their niche. And I would just think about it like a business. If you see what they're doing and you feel like the services that they provide are valuable, then this is something I invest in. It's like being able to invest in Google, in like 1997 or between 1995 and like 2000. And this opens up opportunities because like traditionally if you wanted to invest in a Google back when it was like the size of most cryptocurrencies, you'd have to be an accredited investor or you just have to wait until they go public. In which, if you're buying a share, you're probably buying a share from the venture capital funds that invested in Google back when it was still tiny. And so this opens up the ability to invest in things that have that type of growth potential just as a regular person without having to be an accredited investor, without having to have all this money. And so I would find something that you believe actually works, find something that you've used. I would recommend playing around with it because that's the best way to learn. And just, yeah, I like, this is not financial advice.
Exactly. Disclaimer. Okay.
But I'm telling you, like, some of my biggest holdings right now are like Solana. I like Solana because I also love Ethereum, but I think Solana is just the faster horse in this race. I use it more. A lot of the stuff that has been going on in this specific bull market has been taking place on Solana. And so I just feel like if that many people use it, it's only a matter of time before it gets more valuable. And so I like to buy and wait. I also like, let's say, Airdrome Finance, which is Coinbase has their own. We haven't talked about layer twos yet, but things like Ethereum have gotten so big and that when you're trying to transact, it's so much competition that you're going to end up paying a lot of dollars in fees just to make sure your stuff goes across. So, like, what they allow people to do is create layer twos to where you can still use the Ethereum network, but you don't have to go through all of the stuff that you have to deal with on Ethereum. And so, Coinbase created a layer two. It's like, imagine like a bridge over a highway. That's kind of what it is. And it's called Base. I think that because Coinbase is the easiest to use and because it's already a public company and because it has the name recognition, that when most people get onto crypto, they're probably going to start on Coinbase. And so if Coinbase specifically has this layer two that they built, and then there's this one exchange, Aerodrome, that is essentially the main exchange that that chain is using, again, I think that if a lot of people use it, it will become more valuable. And so I go about picking things like that. There's also, Sui, which is came after Solana. It's like, again, faster and quicker. But they have their own niche. So I look at it like that. I evaluate each coin like I would a company.
Or is there a source that you use? Like, what's the resource to kind of look at all these options?
You can go to CoinGecko, things like
Oh.
Yeah. CoinGraph,
Coin market cap.
CoinMarketCap, and they're aggregators, so they'll see what tokens have launched, and then they'll keep the price fluctuations, the what they call them, the charts for each of these. But that's a good place to start. And even when you go on some of these exchanges, they'll have different tokens and what's being launched. But again, here's the thing about a centralized exchange: they get to choose what they allow on their platform.
Okay.
So maybe there's an asset that you want to get, right? But Coinbase doesn't list it because they might think it's too risky. They just haven't put it on there. They haven't got around to it. But you want to buy that asset because it's centralized. You can't. But if it's decentralized, you go to any of these exchanges, you can get access to that. So just to kind of round back to that earlier conversation, and I think like it's just research heavy. Just like anything with finance, and especially when you talk about the investment side, you have to do research, right? What he believes in might not be what I believe in. What he's looking at as terms of value metrics, I might not be looking at, right?
Okay.
And there's so many different layers to invest in this space, right? There are decentralized games, right? Decentralized, again, those apps, more the utility
There's
tokens.
real world assets where people are just like uploading their deeds for their houses on the blockchain.
Yeah, we're tokenizing the real world because instead of having to go to a bank, sign a bunch of contracts to exchange the value of underlying asset, well, we just put in a smart contract. I click a button, you click a button, instant. Right?
Okay.
I think, was it Baltimore just put all of their real estate on the blockchain. So now I believe it's deeds, titles, and all that exists in a centralized database. So now you can see it on chain. And so that helps again with that exchanging of information because now you know where the deed is and the title. You don't got to go look for X, Y, and Z.
Crazy.
A fun fact about that is that, well, not about that topic specifically, but do you remember when Clark Atlanta and Invest Atlanta were fighting over who actually owned Morris Brown's, that part of Morris Brown's campus?
I remember that.
It happened a few years back, but I believe Clark Atlanta purchased it first, and then Invest Atlanta came and purchased the same property after, and there was a confusion about like who actually owned what, and it was actually like a really long lawsuit for them to figure out who owned what. And with things like this, it's like now we have one source of truth.
So I want to get into smart contracts, but first I have a question. So you mentioned business. I kind of tweaked my entrepreneurial side, right? So there is a way that, say I have an accounting client, I've done some work for them. I can collect my payment cash and Bitcoin.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, most payment processing systems actually include Bitcoin. Like I want to say PayPal and Stripe.
Yeah.
Both will allow you to transact with Bitcoin, Ethereum, or US dollar coins.
And they already have most of the market share, so they're already pretty much integrated into businesses. So like that's just an easy win for them. But there are other companies that are trying to allow payment services like a MoonPay, different ways for people to again transact or receive value. But if I was a business owner, I mean, why not take crypto? You can prioritize cash and the USD all day, but if there's someone who's willing to buy from you in crypto, that should be an option for them, and that's just gonna benefit you, in my opinion.
Yeah, because you're especially if I let it sit, right? Which is the goal.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, it's a Happy Pizza Day just passed. I want to say a few months ago. Back when Bitcoin, I want to say was probably less. It was less than $1. A guy bought a pizza with a bunch of Bitcoin, and I want to say that pizza today is probably worth over $100 million. Just in terms of what he paid for it.
Where was I?
Everyone not paying attention.
Exactly. Like, whew. Okay. So, let's go to smart contracts, because that whole phenomenon is mind blowing to me. That we can literally have like a physical asset, piece of property, tangible, can be transacted through this process. So let's talk about that. Just smart. What is it called?
Smart contracts. Yes. Yeah. How should we start? I was about to say.
What is it?
I mean, so it's code. At the end of the day, smart contract is just code. But again, it's a set code that is meant to run between whatever inputs and outputs that you decide upon, and it executes automatically. So once the conditions are hit, as you said before, it runs automatically. So what are those conditions? Well, depending on your coder and the person who's building this smart contract, it can be, from as complex as, when 6 people send this much money, everyone gets paid out X, Y, and Z, to as simple as when it, let's just say the temperature turns 50 degrees, you get sent, a payment. Mm-hmm. It can be whatever you want, but it's just an agreement built in code that automatically executes. And you do need a very good developer to manage your smart contract. One, because it's if software engineering and coding is already hard, this is the next or a new layer and level of it, so it makes it even harder. So qualified smart contract developers are in high demand because it's a very pretty much a new area of coding, so it gets hard. Plus you're dealing with money, and if your smart contract fails, one, you could lose that money, meaning the money went in, but some part of the contract was either written wrong or whatever, and now it's sent off into crypto internet space, and you don't know where it went.
And also, people can hack your smart contract.
Hack your smart contract, take money that's sitting in there, right? So you want to be very careful about how this is built out on the tech side, right? But again, contracts are just a way for us to engage in trustful relations with each other, right? We've both agreed to a set of norms or rules, and instead of us having to go to an arbitrator, meaning a lawyer, all right, the courts, if something doesn't go right here on this piece of paper we both signed, we don't worry about that because it's automatic execution. Either you hit the parameters or you don't, and it goes through or it doesn't. And so it allows us to trust each other in a minimal sense without us having to necessarily do any type of arbitration or come together to work out what we agreed upon here. And I think that fundamentally changes how we talk about governance, right? How it talks about how we exchange value amongst each other and amongst groups. Because again, we're a nation of laws. The U.S. is a nation of laws, and at the end of the day, if there's ever a discrepancy or whatever, from the highest to the lowest, you got to go to court. All right, you're going to go to court. But this takes legality and puts it into the internet, and that's just new and that's different. So you'll hear people may talk about something called a wrapper, right, which is essentially, because all of this new tech stuff is new, there's no precedent for it in a lot of legal jargon and on the books. And so people are kind of making that up or figuring that out as they go. And they're looking at precedent. So for us, when we talk about DAOs, right, we call them digital cooperatives. I think Wyoming was the first state to actually implement DAOs in their corporation bylaw structures that you can build out a company, and it's a DAO LLC. But they're kind of seen as LLCs, at least from Wyoming standards. But there's other places, right? The Cayman Islands have created some stuff around DAOs. I think what is it? Not Wyoming, but Delaware, they were creating, and everyone's just kind of looking at, all right, who did it first? Yep. All right, what did you do? Okay, that works. We like that. Maybe we don't like that part. All right, here's ours now. And that's really, I have a background in philosophy, so some of this stuff for me is that I get really excited about it because essentially you're creating new concepts of how we interact with each other in society. Yeah. And that for me is just amazing because you can really start to imagine new ways of doing things, and instead of it just being fantasy, it's like, oh, here's an actual road and toolkit to make that work.
Yeah, it's like there was recently a group of farmers that formed a smart contract to replace their crop insurance. And so it was like, okay, we each pay into this thing every month like we would for crop insurance normally, but instead of it going to this insurance company, it just sits in here. And then if, these are the weather conditions or these are the conditions that are necessary in order to get a payout for your crop insurance, and then once it hits it, they just automatically transact. And so people have already been using these types of things informally, and just as the technology gets better and people become more and more just aware of what's possible, it's only going to get bigger.
So that brings me to my next question. When you were talking about smart contracts, I immediately thought, okay, so are attorneys still needed?
Yes.
They are still needed to kind of oversee.
For starters, the attorneys can probably help write the smart contract.
Okay.
And I mean, it's just like there's always going to be a human element because there's like we haven't completely removed, humans from the process. It's still like you're human and the person that you're transacting with is human. There's less of a need for lawyers, but there is still obviously like they have a place in terms of
Okay.
Yeah, you gotta have lawyers so that's the difference when in the crypto space they talk about on chain, off chain. So you can do things on chain, which means everything is handled on chain, meaning either there's votes, you can see the smart contracts. You use that as your trust and verification. But let's just say something happens, someone loses some money, and they're like, "Hey, I want my money back." Well, you can still do something off chain. You can still go to court. You can still, bring a lawsuit, right? And then what'll be your evidence? Well, your evidence will be what happened on the blockchain. Was there anything set outside of that? So lawyers are still needed. There's just going to have a new layer of what needs legality or legalese around it. So just like AI, lawyers are now having to figure out what does AI mean for our practice. It's the same. And honestly, I think AI and smart contracts are going to have a wedding. I mean, they kind of already have, but it's going to get bigger because when you talk about autonomous agents working online, how do you ensure that those autonomous agents, interact appropriately and with, trust? Well, smart contracts, right? The AI is running these smart contracts now, and that's how you can govern AI in a sense or keep them to some type of standard in a contract sense, right? And so I think that's going to be an interesting space.
Interesting. So let's take it a step further. In my regard, as a CPA, when you think about where things are shifting, what would you advise someone like me who is wanting to get in the mix and wanting to benefit, customers where it's relevant, what they need? What would you advise me?
As an accountant,
I think the simplest thing is if you're working with someone and they don't know, right, to just inform them of what it is. I think a lot of people just don't know it exists, or they know it exists, but they don't really understand it.
Scary.
Right. Yeah, it's scary, it's new, or you don't really need it, right? So what is this? I don't need this stuff, or you think you don't need it. And so if your job is to help someone manage their assets, right, maybe you say, hey, this is something you can look into, or you should be aware of this. I think the diversifying your portfolio. I think the institutional safe cap was like 3%.
Yeah.
If you have assets, dedicate 3% to this, emerging asset class of cryptocurrency. Stay within that space of like Bitcoin and Ethereum, right? Maybe not getting into this extra stuff, but you should be aware that financial markets are trending toward tokenization. And if you are dealing with finances and helping people deal with their finances, you should be aware of what tokenization is, why it matters, how it affects them, especially if you're a CPA for real estate. Again, like we said, like tokenizing real world assets, like, and again, as we said earlier, this is a big space. It's so much to cover, just not from the finance side, but from the tech side and all that. So as a CPA, I think, just being aware and informing your customers of what it is, why it's important, and how they should maybe start to think about it.
yeah. And as you were talking, a thought occurred to me, and I haven't done too much research on what this actually looks like, but the ability to, like, let's say someone owns a property. Before, when you sold a property, obviously you had to sell the entire property, but now with the tokenization of assets, you could sell fractional parts.
Oh.
And so what does this mean from like a tax perspective or even accounting perspective? If, for example, I sell 20% of my property via the blockchain, and yeah, and also just taxes in general with crypto. It's like,
They're gonna tax you.
yeah, they're gonna tax you, but
that's
then
why some people get into crypto to get away from the taxes. Get away from
I'll figure out a way.
I haven't like completely read the Genius Bill, but there's also like, okay, is a capital gains tax, like, does that kick in if you trade crypto from, let's say, Bitcoin to stable coins? I'm not exactly sure. And just for clarity, stable coins are basically coins that are always going to be worth $1. So, in the sense of like, you can trade your Bitcoin for stable coins, which is going to be worth whatever that was worth in US dollars. But I'm not sure if that's a taxable event or not. But the Genius Bill should talk about that.
Yeah, as a CPA, I mean, you're dealing with money, which is frustrating in and of itself. I'd say, it's just it's the evolution of money, right? I was saying when this first kind of started, I was like, well, fiat money, as they call it, isn't going to die. It's not going to, completely be eclipsed. Maybe in a couple decades, possibly, sure. But I think you're just going to have, these dual economies. You're going to have people doing stuff on chain because it's possible now. You're going to have people who are still off chain, right? And I guess depending on who your clientele is, right? Again, letting them know that both of these avenues exist, right? I think about staking, right? When you talk about interest rates, right? Everybody's like, get a high yield savings account, right? Get your, what is it, 4%, 5% interest, right? You can put some of these crypto coins into pools that are 80, 120% interest.
Those are never sustainable.
They're not sustainable, but
it's like on average
it exists. And my thing is it exists, and it's possible. I mean, just for the safest area of it, I mean, you can put your stuff in a pool that's 12%. Like you don't get that in traditional, finance. And so if you're trying to help someone, maximize their assets, maybe hey, take a 3%. Put it in this pool right here. It's more yield than a high yield saving account from was it Goldman Sachs? Yeah.
Love that.
So it's complicated because like historically, yes, every currency goes to zero. It's like you could say like the most successful currency of all time, which is like the British pound, has also like is down 99% over its lifetime. And so that is the natural course of money for any government that's continuously printing money in order to be able to like devalue the dollar so that its debt is worth less and it's easier to pay off. So you want to have a conversation about monetary theory, that's like a whole thing. But I'd say at the end of the day, I don't think the dollar is going to disappear. I think we're more likely to see something like, okay, the dollar is the world reserve currency right now. You might have a short period where whatever BRICS is cooking up becomes a world reserve currency in its own right. And then, eventually I feel like we'll get to a point where you'll have currency that is just like backed by Bitcoin.
And that's initially what Bitcoin, again, people wanted it to be. There are people who, it shouldn't be a store of value. It should be a, currency. It should be used for trading, purchasing, et cetera. Again, that's a value, philosophical difference, right? It's being used as a store of value because that's the people who are using it saw that use and they're using it for that. And that's kind of the beauty, I think, around it. But in terms of like the dollar being devalued, I mean, you can go look up any of the stats. If you aren't making, what is it, 11%? If your raise isn't at least 11% this year, and the next year it'll probably be 12%. Then you're not outpacing what you should be earning. And so the numbers are there. And again, back to the point, crypto in a lot of ways was made because no one, or the people who made it, didn't want to live in a society where debt is king. Right, because I think there's a thing about debt with people where it's like, you should never be in debt. You shouldn't use debt. Well, wealthy people, that is how they stay wealthy. They use debt. Debt is a tool and is a vehicle when you have enough money to play. When you don't have enough money to play, debt is a problem. You need to stay away from it. But once you hit that level, every podcast, everybody who's ever made a little bit of money, go get you some assets, appreciating. You're going to start playing in debt because that is how our monetary system is created. That is how people have made themselves wealthy. That is the standard of what we do. But do we need to exist in a system that is fundamentally predicated on expanding debt, printing dollars? Well, we don't have to. It works. There are other options. But again, how do we get people to use it? Do they want to use it? Do they know they can use something different? And I think that's the fight here between those who believe in cryptocurrency as a new means to interact on a societal basis, and those who just see it as another vehicle to make money, and we're going to just do what we can.
Yeah, and it's like you talk about money, like, okay, Nixon took us off the gold standard in like the 50s, right? And ever since then it's been the petrodollar. Like the dollar is the only thing that you can use to transact for oil. And so I feel like ultimately it's just going to be a version of getting back to that, which is why I say it'll probably be look something like a dollar backed by Bitcoin or a certain amount of Bitcoin in that sense, just because, it's like if you just leave it up to the U.S. government, yes, they will print the dollar to zero. And it's in their benefit because, what our current debt is, but it's like
Trillions.
something like it's like 15 trillion or something like that.
Too much.
Yeah, it's like we can't afford to pay that off. We've even got to the point where the GDP doesn't even cover the interest payments. And so now they're trying to use cryptocurrency as a tool to actually address that, because now anytime you issue a US dollar coin or stable coin, essentially the dollar that you pay for that coin is being used to buy treasury bonds. And so that's their way of essentially covering their debt. And that's only going to be more popular. And then when all the debt is on chain, it's just like there's essentially there's nothing stopping you from just printing more
Yeah.
dollars. And it doesn't even have to be through the traditional means like it was, like through the Federal Reserve. Now it can just be US dollar coins. And so there's already a lot that's going on behind the scenes that's, it's incentivized to make the dollar less valuable. And so I feel like this will be a stopgap.
That was always my question, like with the decentralization and it being more beneficial to stay that way, why would the government want to get involved? So you kind of spoke to that a little bit.
Yeah, to hide the debt.
Makes sense. Okay.
And you guys realize they didn't see the value in this initially.
Exactly.
Right? There's like, oh, it's a scam. It doesn't matter. Who cares if you can send money over the internet, But now you realize it's cheaper. There's new mechanisms by which you can manipulate your debt or play in debt, right? And so they had to come on board, right? And it's just one of those things where it's always going to kind of be top down. Funny enough, crypto was released, publicly, open license, open source. It was just out there, and anyone could start using it, and people did. But now you see this shift of institutional players hopping in, and they're finding their own means for how this can work for us, because it is kind of just so open use. It's like you can use it for what you want to use it for, and if big money players are hopping in, well, they're going to use it for what they've always used it for. They're not going to use it for anything that would necessarily threaten their dominance in the financial hierarchy, right? So that's why I say it's what you make it. It's just the simple fact that it exists now, which opens up new doors for how we think about what we would want or could do using these tools and this technology.
Is there a danger that at some point the government could take over?
In what sense?
I'm sorry?
What do you, when you say take over? You got
Centralize it.
They can't centralize it at this point. It's like the government has tried to stop Bitcoin at every angle, and it's just once the cat is out the bag, it's like there's a whole world outside of the U.S. And so once we banned it here, it's just
you can still use it.
It's still growing. It's still being used.
Okay.
And you're just icing yourself out. Essentially.
Yeah.
I mean, look at all the places. Russia banned it at some point. China banned it at some point. China
banned
banned it like 8 times. Every year. You
Now
can't
they're
use it. Stop using it. No, because you realize you can't really stop it. Because remember how I talked about those nodes and the blockchain is just a bunch of computers, right?
Yeah.
If I stop all the computers in America from using your Bitcoin or whatever, just take that example, that doesn't stop Bitcoin protocol from still running and people exchanging, right? It's just legally, I've told you can't do this, but structurally, unless I take away your phone, take away your internet access, and take away your ability to access this network, which I don't think people would take very kindly to, you can't really stop people from using it. At best, you have what we have now, which is kind of going away, which is you can't access certain certain domains are not able to run in U.S. Servers and things like that. And so if you try to access an exchange that's, say, based in another country, they'll have a block because they don't want to get sued for offering us services here. And so you use these legal workarounds to dissuade people from using it. But there are ways around that.
So if I can't do it in the U.S., I just do it in the Caymans.
Yeah, essentially.
Wow.
Yeah.
But that's all shifting now. We have an administration that is crypto friendly. They are easing.
They're scam friendly.
Scam friendly.
I was going to say.
Very scam friendly.
Thank you.
But they're opening up the regulations to benefit themselves, obviously. But it, by nature, benefits everyone else because now you can build, you can start to rethink things. It just opens up, again, the avenues by which you can do stuff.
Yeah, it gives me the picture of it kind of, I keep saying it levels the playing field because like you just said, Cayman Islands, back in the day, only the wealthy have that option.
Mm-hmm.
So now it kind of like allows it open highway for people to do what they need need to do?
I mean, internet communities have existed, but now they can coordinate and scale in ways that they couldn't, right? It's not that this is anything new, right? Since the advent of the internet, people have been globally connecting and all that, but now I don't have to fly to meet you to do any type of monetary exchange. We can just agree over this, make sure our smart contract works, use our money, and we never have to interact. We never have to, interface.
You don't even have to go through Western Union and get charged 30%.
And don't have to wait 4 or 5 days for it to settle,
Yeah. This is so great, guys. I don't know if you realize, like, and I guess in my mind, I'm just always thinking of the future, right? And I think that the mindset of a lot of people, we're shifting from what we've been taught, right, to what's real and what's true. And we're kind of getting out of the being in the system, if you will. And I just see this as an avenue. If we all get on board and learn. And I just thank you guys for this knowledge that you have. And you make it so easy to understand. And I just think, keep doing what you're doing. I feel like it's going to be a bigger reason that you're here, right? To speak to the people that want to grow in this area. So I commend you. I don't know how we're supposed to end it, but I'm going to let you guys take over.
I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, we appreciate the conversation. Appreciate your time.